Hello and a very warm welcome to our today's Forest Restoration Talk, the first one after the summer break. My name is Gesche Schifferdecker, and together with Andreas Bolte from IUFRO, I will moderate this webinar today. The Forest Restoration Talks are jointly organized by the SUPERB project and the IUFRO Task Force Transforming Forest Landscape for Future Climates and Human Well-Being. And today we will discuss public perceptions of forest landscape restoration in different regions of the world. And I would like to start with some housekeeping. Next slide, please. As you've already seen, this webinar is being recorded, and we will provide you with a recording later on, either on the, both on the EFI YouTube account and on the IUFRO website. And we have three panelists today who will share their presentations and their thoughts and reflections on forest landscape restoration. And we would really like to invite you to ask them questions after the presentations. We will have a panel, and you can use, as always, the dedicated Q&A box for your questions, and then we will promote you to ask your questions live, because that makes the webinar more interactive. And if you want to tweet about the webinar, please tag us and use IUFRO or SUPERB project. I would like to introduce our first speaker for today now. It will be Moses Kazungu. He is a postdoc in the field of social science in landscape research at the Swiss Federal Institute for Forest, Snow and Landscape Research at the WSL. And yeah, I would like you to start sharing your presentation now. Moses, it's a work you've been doing as part of SUPERB, and I'm really curious to hear the results, or the preliminary results of your current research. Thanks.
Hello? Hello, are you getting me?
We can hear you perfectly.
Perfect. Are my slides clear to everyone?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much, SUPERB and IUFRO, for organizing this conference, and also for inviting us to present our work, though preliminary, but we felt it's important to share with the larger community. I've been introduced, and I'll just mention my name is Moses Kazungu, and I work for the Swiss Federal Institute for Forest, Snow and Landscape Research in Birmensdorf. So this work was produced by me and my supervisor with our partners located in different European countries, whom I'll acknowledge later. The topic of our presentation is exploring forest perceptions, ecosystem benefits, and forest restoration in selected European countries. This is just a preliminary results of what we have found so far. Sorry for that. So I'll give a brief background about SUPERB. SUPERB stands for Systematic Solutions for Upscaling Forest-Related Ecosystem Benefits in Europe. It strives to restore thousands of hectares of forest landscapes across Europe through linking practical and scientific knowledge and building a large network of people and institutions to understand and upscale forest restoration. That through doing this, we will be able to create large-scale forest restoration across Europe and beyond. To achieve this target, SUPERB is organized into 8 work packages or components, each component handling specific tasks. My work is encompassed on work package 5, which looks at governance and forests. And under this, we have 3 different tasks led by 3 different institutions. We have a group looking at forest policies. This is based in Freiburg. We have one group looking at governance around the forest landscapes and forest restoration. These are our colleagues in Bonn. And then I'll be presenting my work on task 3, which is looking at perceptions of the society towards forest and forest restoration. That by these 3 different tasks, we will be able to design a toolkit for monitoring social and economic benefits of forest and forest restoration in Europe and beyond. That's the key, I can say, deliverable that we will need to provide for the project at the end of the project cycle. So our main objective is to map societal perceptions, societal and stakeholders' perceptions and demands of forest restoration and ecosystem benefits. Stakeholders, in this case, imply forest owners, administrators, and other persons or managers and legislators who are involved in forest and forest restoration activities. That in that, we will be able to design an effective monitoring toolkit for understanding how forest restoration changes or is advanced. But to achieve this, we have to start from somewhere. And that is to understand the current forest thinking and forest restoration that is already in place. To do this, we're doing lots of activities through looking at the literature and also conducting surveys, interviews. So going forward, I'll be presenting results of our interviews across 5 countries. The aim of our interview or this perception study is to gain a deeper insight into people's perceptions of forests and forest restoration in Europe. That by understanding how people perceive forest and forest restoration benefits, we will be able to design survey questionnaires, which will be used to understand deeply and widely forest ecosystem benefits associated with forest restoration and what influences these attitudes and perceptions. That's the key purpose. So the design of our work is kind of multifaceted. We are starting with inductive phase, the interviews, which is the basis of my presentation tonight. Then that the outcome of the interviews that we've done will help us to design effective surveys for understanding forest restoration. In this, we divided our surveys in 2. The first survey, which is called regional surveys, will be conducted in 5 countries, which SUPAB, 4 of them, SUPAB called them as demo, they're called as SUPAB demonstration sites or upscaling sites. Then the second survey will be carried across the 12 countries where the demonstration sites are located, but this will be country level surveys. Then results of these 2 surveys will be analyzed and synthesized, and the outcome will be made into consumable product, that is a toolkit and other outputs that will be produced. But going forward, I'll be presenting to you the hows of the inductive phase, that's the interviews, and the outcome of the interviews. That's why we call this preliminary results, because it feeds into the forthcoming surveys. So we conducted interviews in 5 SUPAB working areas located across different regions in Europe. That is Spain, Germany, Sweden, Croatia, and Serbia. We took them as one landscape, and Scotland. So in each of these, we selected between 3 to 5 key informants. Our key informants constituted normal persons, or if where someone who works with a forest institution or a research institution is selected, his views were his personal views, not views of the organization. That was made explicit. And the interviews were conducted in English, and where necessary, for instance, in other areas where English was not the main language, we conducted in 2 translation, which was done by help of our demo leads or partners in specific countries. And each interview lasted between 30 to 60 minutes. So in analysis, we conducted again a dual process. The first was back and forth transcription. This means I transcribed, the team in VSL transcribed and then sent back to the participant to confirm whether what is transcribed reflects the views of that person. Then it's again put into the system, then that's the 2 and 4. Then after that, we coded the interview results and analyzed them. Coding means just organizing them in themes and in countries, then analyze them using the MaxQDA. MaxQDA is a qualitative software for analyzing interviews and other text-related surveys or interviews conducted. So we started first by seeking to understand what people perceive as forest benefits. And in this, we grouped what was perceived as benefits in 4 categories, which is widely known as regulation services, provisioning, habitat, homes for biodiversity habitats, and recreational and cultural. As you can see from this table, that perceptions of forest benefits or ecosystem benefits varied within countries. What people preferred or what people perceive as benefits varied within countries. However, we also noted that across the countries, there are some consistencies in provisioning and recreational services. As you can see, it ranked, these were mentioned quite higher than others across all the countries. Again, this emphasizes the importance of those 2 ecosystem benefits, that's provisioning and monetary benefits and recreational benefits. Going forward, we sought now to understand what do they understand or what is the meaning of forests according to them. So in these 2 ideal classifications arose. 1, this group of people perceived forests as complex and multifaceted entities embodying everything. Everything here implies it provides livelihoods to people, it creates spaces for recreational activities, emotional well-being, and cultural meaning to people. So this group of people looked at forests as very integral in their lifestyles and their living. On the other hand, others looked at forests as unique and isolated haven. This group perceived forests as not integral, as further away from people, but unique, that it provides spaces for cultural meaning, peace, where they go for seek emotional solace, and there are special places for habitats, for nature's habitat. So just what would this imply? From our results, since this was conducted in 5 countries, this implies that irrespective of the location or jurisdiction, people seem to perceive forests in either in kind of 2 ways, as something that provides them everything or something that is too unique and isolated that needs to be preserved. And it implies that actually when designing forests programs, or even when planning for any restoration activities, there's need to integrate the needs and perceptions of people who seem not to be so close to forest activities or who are just passive in forests because they also have an opinion. Then in this, we're trying to look at differences across countries if they really do exist. Within countries, as you see, we had the geo-perception of forests. Then we noticed also that across countries, there seem to be some quantitative numbers, similar numbers of people having same thinking that forests are everything to them. If you look at, this is especially in the East, Serbia, Croatia, and Spain, where majority of people in this study seem to prefer forests as everything. Then when you look at the north, that's and central Germany had only 2 participants, and Sweden, many people perceived forests as unique places. Then we try to put all this in the context or within the framework of forest restoration. In this, we looked at 3 aspects. We looked at how are people aware of forest restoration. Then we look at the ecosystem benefits associated with forest restoration or the aims of forest restoration. And then what do people consider as most important? In terms of awareness, we realized, yes, people were aware, they were involved in forest restoration, but especially through planning activities. Then we sought to understand what were the goals of this forest restoration. As you can see, most of the forest restoration activities in the area, in the 5 study areas, targeted at biodiversity conservation. Then let's look, do these restoration goals match with people's priorities or what people think is important to them? That's what we are looking here. So here we ask them, what do they consider as most important? Yes, people considered biodiversity as most important, but they also considered recreational and cultural benefits as important. Now the question is, did forest restorations implemented meet people's objectives? Partly, yes, because the target matched with what people consider most important, but it did not address mainly recreational activities. For future restoration activities, need to integrate multiple goals, objectives than just targeting biodiversity. So these are just preliminary conclusions. These results will need to be cross-checked in the next studies. So in the meanings, we concluded that programs must embrace inclusivity, incorporating the perspectives of different forest users. Regarding variations of perceptions across geographical regions, projects or programs need to be specific to capture different and unique variations across the countries. Regarding restoration goals, it should encompass all different aspects of the society, ecological to social concerns. With that, our next step will be survey 1 and 2, which is starting soon up to November. Then survey 2 starts from April next year. That's the designs and implementation likely in August. Data analysis and underwriting will be an ongoing process. With that, I thank especially our demo leads in Croatia and Serbia, in Spain, Sweden. Åsa, thank you so much, and the group, Scotland, and Germany. Thank you so much for making this a success. You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Moses, for this presentation and for inspiring us. I find it. I was really surprised actually with the results from Germany. Maybe I have a direct follow-up question, and then we can, of course, you can also put your questions in the chat. But is it correct that no one answered that forests are everything? And is it correct that people are not at all aware of the biodiversity conservation impacts of or aims of the restoration activity?
Yes, you are correct, but with a caveat. Germany, in this case, was a unique case because we only had 2 people who were willing to be interviewed. In other areas, they're from 3 to 5. So in German case, there are only 2, and that is their view. Yes, that's why it looks kind of peculiar, but if the number had gone up to 5 as others, we would have seen the variations in the thinking. Yeah.
So that gives you, of course, then a limited that gives you limited knowledge about the perceptions. It would have been better to have more interviews to get a kind of broader picture.
Perfect. Yes, with Germany, I'd even thought of isolating it, but I just put it, but it's not, the outcome from Germany is not something we can advance. Yeah, thank you.
I don't see any question from the audience yet in the Q&A. Andreas, do you have a direct response, or and then I would also like to hand over to you to introduce Vianny eventually.
Yeah, thank you, Geshe, and thank you also, Moses, for this inspiring talk. Yes, I have no direct question to you, Moses, and my suggestion would be also to have a wrap-up discussion also at the end. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Vianny Ahimbisibwe. Vianny is working at the Thünen Institute of Forestry in Hamburg, so our partner institute. And Vianny was born in Uganda, and he received a bachelor in science from Makerere University in Uganda. And then he came several years ago to Germany, and he did his master at the Technical University in Dresden. And Vianny, I already met last week also I think your supervisor at the forest conference in Dresden. So I can say, or he asked me to say hello to you. And now he's working for several years also in a project at our Thünen Institute, dealing with forest landscape restoration in Ethiopia. And it's a project dealing on one hand with the biophysical aspects, and I see also in the audience my colleague Alfred Ali, who is also included in the project, but also on the question of how are people or about people perceptions on forest restoration in Ethiopia. And I think, Vianny, you will present also now some results on your work, I think, on the interface of forestry and social science and perception. Perception of the population. Yeah, so Vianny, the floor is yours. Please start with your presentation.
Yes, hopefully everybody is hearing me.
It's okay. Not
It's
ideal,
okay.
but yeah, yeah.
All right. I would say thank you so much for this opportunity. Thanks, PAP Project and IUFRO Task Force for really organizing these forest talks or forest restoration talks. And also thank you, Andreas Bote, for introducing me with all that introduction. I appreciate a lot. And yeah, I would say thanks to everybody and for those who have managed to attend online. As Andrea said, by the names Vianny Ahimbisibwe, I'll pronounce that slowly for the rest to get a glimpse of the pronunciation. And as Andrea said, I work for Thünen Institute on Institute of Forestry, and I currently working in the FLESRA project, which is mainly restoration of forest land use potentials and ecosystem services. For today, I'll just give you a short glimpse of stakeholder preference, perception on restoration strategies and the different important values. However, to go into detail of the presentation, I wanted to show you the general overview of our project. And here we have 3 work packages looking at governance, which is focusing on synergies and mismatch in actor values, restoration strategies across federal landscape level. And here at the same time, we're looking at the policy environment, which will come in, I think, in the working paper. We are trying to write a paper within that work package. And package 2, which looks at actor, small order needs, focusing on the environmental cost-benefit analysis of the identified restoration strategies under varying social biophysical settings. Then package 1, which is more on silvicultural performance of these restoration strategies on production, biodiversity recovery, carbon sequestration. The project, as Andrea said, is handled by 2 sister institutes, and the Institute of Forest Ecosystems is mainly focused on package 1, which is silviculture, and our institute, which is Institute of Forestry, is looking at governance and work package 2. However, work package 2 is a bridge between the 2 work packages. Therefore, we work hand in hand between the 2 institutes. For today, I'll give you a glimpse of ongoing work and partial results on synergies and mismatch, on actor values and restoration strategies. And our case study is in Ethiopia, of which Ethiopia is well known for its commitment. It has so far committed around 22 million hectares to be restored. So it was a good case study to look at and to represent sub-Saharan Africa with its dynamics in socioeconomics and biophysical settings. And here we're looking at, we evaluated project sites and also interviews from projects initiated by the state administration from different ministries, enterprises, projects such as Regreening Africa, GIZ biodiversity projects, Red Plus, UNDP, World Vision sites, We Forest, Community Church, and farmers. And at the end, we interviewed key informants and household representatives, a sample of 473 individuals, of which we decided to get more farmers, more number of farmers to be interviewed compared to the to other actors for reasons of to capture the diversity among farmers themselves, because different farmers would want or would have different perception on the given issues. And to answer the first aspect of restoration strategies, we asked actors and key informants from the current activities or restoration activities they are conducting, what are the activities to be implemented in the upscaling activities in the different landscapes. And here we had indicators from active agroforestry and assisted natural regeneration. And under active, we had establishment of boundary plantations, establishment of buffer plantations with single species and also mixed planted species. On the other hand, we had the agroforestry aspect, which is more of mixing pasture with shade trees for animals, and also mixing crops with shade and fruits trees, which are like 2 indicators. As you see in the landscapes, we observed different agroforestry systems. For example, the banana fruit tree system, then the coffee acacia and coffee moringa agroforestry systems. On the other hand, we asked about assisted natural regeneration. Now, here there's a discussion between pure exclosures or pure protection. But then, based on the discussion with key informants, they said pure protection and pure exclosures are not really performing well. So they planned and they decided to put in things like enrichment planting, issues of protecting, regenerating seedlings, and also constructing soil conservation structures and the farmer managed natural regeneration. With this, these are partial results. Of course, there are some in-depth analysis. We realized that among the actors, those who are facilitating landscape implementation of these strategies are more pushing forward or more intent to conduct assisted natural generation, as seen in Figure 4. However, those who are implementing these activities in the landscapes are more intending to apply active restoration strategy. So with this, you realize that farmers are more indifferent in the activities they are conducting, and also the activities they intend to implement in the upscaling of these restoration initiatives. But sadly, you realize that all the planning and all the answers indicate that agroforestry is really the least preferred option or intended option to be implemented. Now, these are discussions. There's a lot of literature and frameworks on agroforestry management, adoption, and all this. But when you go to the ground, the view is kind of different, as we see in the results. With regards to the values, now here I did it a little bit different from my former colleague, Moses. I used the Millennium Assessment Framework and also the Value Attribute Landscape Framework to create indicators. And actors here, Pedro scored 30 indicators from 0 to 100 in terms of ranking. And what I did, I subgrouped the indicators. Instead of grouping them in terms of provisioning, regulating, supporting, and culture, I decided to group them based on the aim of the actors. For example, we see food, timber, non-timber forest product, water provision, soil erosion control, microclimate, which involves stop strong winds, shade, and also we have carbon sequestration, biodiversity, culture, and intrinsic values. With that, the results indicated a good picture on the other hand, but also on the other hand, not really a good picture. For example, we see that all actors, irrespective of facilitators or implementers, consider a band of important services or aims, which they are looking at to achieve by implementing the ranked strategies we saw earlier. And here you see that microclimate, non-timber forest products, timber, post carbon sequestration, soil vitalization, and major services aimed at to be implemented in these landscapes. However, biodiversity and pristine are the least prioritized aims or services in these areas. Of course, there are discussions why biodiversity is not ranked or aimed at more compared to other services, because even though we have frameworks, as I said before, we have debates, we have advocacy for biodiversity, but when you come to the implementation itself, in reality, biodiversity is a secondary option. So with this, the way forward would be that fine, actors have common bundles of values or services aimed at, but with differing restoration strategies, especially among facilitators and implementers. Thus, both actor categories need to come to a common table to avoid conflicts which we see in the field, and also conflicts which upcoming conflicts during upscaling of these initiatives. Also, more science policy dialogues, including farmers themselves within these dialogues, are needed in order to streamline these intended strategies among actors. Because the side of the farmers is clear. They want all the three strategies, but then there's this push towards strategies more than the other. So they need to be involved into these dialogues, into the planning, or they have to be engaged clearly during the planning and implementation. And one entry point during the negotiation will be the microclimate timber and non-timber forest products as aims can act as entry point for after negotiation and priority setting. And I leave a question mark. Increasing biodiversity should not be really forgotten among actors, especially at the implementation level. With that said, thank you for your attendance. Thanks to Thünen, to CIFO, our partner in Ethiopia, to IUFRO Task Force, GIZ, farmers and other stakeholders, and field assistants to making this data come here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Vianny, for this really interesting talk. And it's also interesting to see also the different priorities among the different groups, like the facilitators and the implementers. But this may be also some interesting points of discussion afterwards. So, Geshe, my idea is more or less that we go on with the third presentation and then more or less to discuss it because I think that's really interesting views if you look from the different continents. So I will hand the floor open more to you.
Yeah, I agree. Because also the spices in the comparison. I already took some notes and I have questions for later. But I would indeed agree that we should continue with the third presentation for today now. So I'm happy to introduce Åsa Granberg. She's leading our superb Swedish demo. And she's been working with planning and conducting ecological restoration for many years. She used to be an ecosystem consultant, and today she's working in the regional authority in Sweden, which is called Länsstyrelsen Västerbotten, which is managing all the nature reserves and national parks in the region, which is to date about 400. However, the superb demo is quite big, but it's only a part of what the company, what the authority is managing. And I'm curious to hear about public perceptions in Sweden and what you are experiencing during your work with the Swedish superb demo. Åsa, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Let's see if I can do this sharing in a way that it works fine.
Looks
do you
good.
See it? Okay, perfect. And I will see my notes also. Thank you very much, Geshe, and thank you for inviting me to talk tonight or today about people and their perception on forest restoration in Sweden or in northern Sweden. As Geshe so nicely presented me with, I'm working for Länsstyrelsen Västerbotten, which is the, in English it's called the County Administration Board. So we're managing and also doing ecological restoration or biodiversity for biodiversity regions in quite many of the protected areas in our county. I'm, as Geshe also said, I'm the sort of the practical coordinator for the North Swedish superb demo called Vindelälven Juhtaka. And today I will try to cover these questions, focusing on what ordinary people actually think about the kind of restoration actions that we're planning and doing, and how we're working to raise awareness and engagement among the public. But to help you understand what I'm telling, I will try to set the scene a bit for you to begin with. So this is, as you can see, I can see, this is our demo area, and the county that Geshe said that I'm working with is about this size, and compared to Brussels or to Belgium, it's almost the same size. So it's very huge. And it's also very much dominated by forest. So as you can see, all the green here is forest. Although most of the forest in this area is rather heavily managed, with clear cutting is the dominating harvest practice. So it leaves the forest rather poor in biodiversity. But for most public, this is still forest. And in Sweden, forests are open to anyone to hike in, to pick berries, to pick mushrooms, independently of who's the owner. So compared to many other places in Europe, most people in this area actually live rather close to the forests and also utilizes and spend time in the forest quite frequently. And within this area, we are working quite in our demo area, we're working quite much with information and dialogue on more passive restoration actions, for example, managing the forest with more close to nature forestry, for example. So we're meeting or trying to meet forest owners, politicians, students, and of course also the public to talk and discuss about this. But when it comes to actual restoration actions, we're working in these two sites. Here, this one is called Skatan, and this one is called Umeälvdal. And it's this one is quite close to the regional capital, which is called Umeå. However, when it comes to demography, there's a quite big difference between these two restoration sites. In this region, most people live along the coast, and of course, mainly around the two cities in the county. And as you can see, the area where the restoration site Skatan is situated is quite sparsely populated. So there's actually very few people here to have any opinion about our actions compared to the restoration site here in Umeälvdal, which is also situated in a quite popular recreation area close to the city. And as I presented now, the sort of geography and demography, which I think is quite important to have in mind when you're thinking about people's perception. Another thing that is, of course, is important to people's perceptions of restoration is what kind of restoration you're taking. And in this restoration area here in Skatan, we're doing and planning quite many different types of restoration actions. Whereas in this restoration area, Umeälvdal, we're doing restoration that is mainly targeting, or the mean of it is to promote deciduous trees and create habitat for white-backed woodpecker, which is a threatened and rare species in Sweden. So all of these, the restoration measures that we're doing actively, they are to promote some kind of biodiversity or for reindeer herding, for example, and it's not changing the forest very much. So keep that in mind compared to, for example, clear cutting, which is the most common other activity in the forest, the most common harvest method in the region. And also, which is part of the people's background to their perception, none of these restoration actions that we're doing is actually new in the region. Here you can see all the places that I know of where some kind of active forest restoration similar to the ones we're doing have been taking place. And all the blue dots here are the actions, forest restoration actions taken by me and my colleagues in the County Administration Board. So with this background, and that hopefully gives you a bit more, make you a little bit more familiar with the scene, I will try to answer the questions that I talked about in the beginning. And I would focus on the restoration actions that we're taking here in Umeälvdal, because this is where the public might be actually most affected. And I will base the answer quite much on the experience from the other forest restoration actions that me and my colleagues in the County Administration Board have been doing in this region. So what's the public's general perception on the forest restoration actions here? I would say that it's surprisingly seldom anyone is straight up negative to the actions. People might be a bit questioning, integrative, and maybe a bit skeptical, but often after you've met them, talked to them, and informed them about why and what, they often become more rather positive, or at least not negative. And quite many are quite curious on the actions. However, we do work quite hard to counteract any public negative opinion, and we're working a lot with communication. So, for example, we're trying to get the local newspaper to write about the restoration actions. So this is an article that was published, I think, 1st of September, about the actions that we're taking here in Umeälvdal. We're also working quite hard with putting up informative signs at the site where the restoration is taking place. If we feel it's needed, and we organize meetings in the field with different stakeholder groups. We communicate through social media. So this is actually a small film that was made before we made very similar restoration actions that we're planning now in this area, Umeälvdal here, that we made in a nature reserve down here. And sometimes we also send out information letters to the closest neighbors if we think there might be, if there is many people living close by to the place where you're doing the actions. So to summarize this with some factors for positive public perception, I think one of the most important ones are communications beforehand on what will happen on the site, afterwards what has happened when someone is coming there and see it might look a bit messy, there will be dead trees lying around. Inform them what has happened, what have we been doing there, what's the reason for it, what's the importance of the actions, and also communicate success stories from the restoration, if there are any, of course. I think it's also very important to listen to people, to their thoughts and concerns, and if possible, adjust the actions to meet their concerns. Be flexible with for example, in time when you're doing the actions, but do not promise things that you cannot fulfill, because that's something that create negative opinions, especially in the long run, if you promise things that you don't fulfill. And I also think it's important to highlight other positive aspects of the restoration for the public. So other than, for example, most of the restoration actions that we're taking is primarily for enhancing biodiversity. But in this region, the actions will also make the forest less dense, more open and lighter, which often is experienced quite positive for the public. So communicate those other positive aspects also. So that's all from me from the North Swedish perspective. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Åsa. Actually, I was just talking to my team, we were really impressed with your beautiful slides, apart from the content of the presentation, which was great, but also the slides are very beautiful. One can see that you are involved with communication activities. So thank you for that. I have several questions here now. I suggest we also open the floor, of course, to questions from the audience. And if there's already one question, which is from Marcel, and I think it would be good if Priscilla and Gabi could promote him as a panelist so that he can ask the question live. Yeah, there you go. Please, Marcel, ask the question live. Engage with the panel.
There was something going on first here. I just a methodical question to both Sweden and Ethiopia. So how exactly did you get the information? So in Ethiopia you had this more than 400 people. Was that a mailback survey, or how did you do that? Or maybe I missed it in your presentation. Maybe the same question to Åsa. How did you get informed about the view of the people in your area? So you also can talk a little bit about the different approaches of how to learn about the public view on forest restoration.
All right. I think I'll start with that. Perhaps for the case of Ethiopia, yeah, we did face-to-face interviews, especially with email system in Ethiopia. It cannot work, and we use the pedal scoring, which whereby key informants would ask, what do I do here? How do I do this? And things. So I needed to be there, and also the assistants needed to be there to explain this pedal scoring methodology, which helped a little bit because the first one with yes, no, did you apply this? They would take heavily answer yes, until when we said no, let's do some pedal scoring and some ranking. Then that's when now we see this categorization coming up. And also we did the same with the farmers. We couldn't do focus group discussions because of COVID time and also other uncertainties which happened during the data collection. So we had to do face-to-face interviews.
Yeah. It was quite time consuming, I guess, huh? Wow, impressive. Thank you.
Yeah, and the same question for us. It's I mean, I based this my presentation on sort of the reactions we get from the public when we're actually doing restoration actions. So I asked before I put this presentation together. I asked my colleagues what reactions do you get when you meet people? Have you get any reactions? I mean, we have on Facebook we have a Facebook group called Nature Reserves in Västerbotten County or something, with a couple of 100 followers. And I mean, there you communicate what is going on, and then you get reactions, of course. I was also looking in the on the on what kind of reactions there were on this the paper article, and there was one person who had reacted. So it's not that many, and normally the people that react are the one that's maybe not that positive. So so many of my colleagues said, yeah, well, yeah, we're surprised we get very, very few comments, or very few negative comments, especially when we're also doing burning in nature reserve, burning forests, which is a little bit more intrusive. You get the smoke, you can see it from far away. It's much bigger thing happening, but also then it's very few negative reactions.
That's quite interesting. In Switzerland, usually the negative comments come first. So
yeah, I mean, it does in Sweden too, but there are very few negative. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for your question, Marcel. We have a question in the chat, which is coming from Fadi Deno. He's from Lebanon and he's working on engaging biosphere reserves in concrete integration of forest landscape restoration practices in their respective management plans. And he's really inspired by your methodology, Åsa, and he would love to know more about the local community's engagement. And it would be cool if you would also tell a little bit about, I mean, you've already elaborated a little bit on your communication strategy, but he would like to get some best practice still to learn for the biosphere reserves in Lebanon. That's at least how I understood the question. We tried to promote him, but it didn't work from a technical point of view. That's why I'm reading the question.
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much for the question. It's, I mean, we do have a communicator person hired to do communication, and then she's communicating for the whole nature conservation department, which is not only working with managing the strictly protected areas, but then we also have one person working solely with like signs and so on. So we have sort of quite much resources. We put quite much resources on that. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, if you have people that know the handcraft to do this, it's much easier, of course.
Thank you, Åsa.
I don't know. Yeah.
Thank you also for highlighting that, for emphasizing that it makes sense to hire communication professionals for your work, which I can very much support. We have a next question from Alfred, who is also the colleague of Vianny, and he's been in several of our webinars. Alfred, you have 2 questions, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Gasha, and everyone who has presented. I have 2 questions. One specifically goes to Vianny, since we are all sharing perceptions from different contexts, and Kazungu has presented from the European context. I think it would benefit all of us if you could just give an impression of what would be the difference or the similarities in terms of what Kazungu summarizes as people who view restoration as, or forests as, everything to them in terms of providing maybe multiple ecosystem benefits, but also those who look at it as an isolated, pristine system. What would be your experience from Ethiopia? And then the other question would go to Åsa, and since she's really into the leadership scope, my question was, in terms of participation of people, because you present that there are some people who are quite negative, or sometimes present a bit of negativity at the beginning until the restoration concept is explained to them. What is the involvement like? At what stage do people get engaged into the implementation of these restoration activities? Is it all through from the planning implementation phases, or it only gets to them when you go to the site and you're planning to do an activity? Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Alfred, and thanks for coming in from Uganda. I hope you're enjoying your holidays, before we engage into appropriate issues again.
I'm trying my best.
Yeah, with the question you raised, actually, when I was viewing Moses's presentations, I was a little bit smiling because it is more into an introduction to what I just said in my presentation. The question of pristine and intrinsic is more into a deep core value, which you can observe from the outside level. But this is more into culture, religious, forests are there. And these forests which they attach pristine, or they attach, they're just there for future generation, for education, spiritual purposes. They are never touched, and there are few for the case of Ethiopia. Now, we have to differentiate between the forests which are there and the restoration of the degraded forest and farmland landscapes. When you come now to the restoration part of it, they forget the pristine aspect. They rush to the benefits they would want to obtain from this restoration, because of course they're putting the costs and all these aspects. And in view to Moses's presentation, I think Ethiopia and the cases Moses presented are more different levels in terms of need, because the other side, they're looking more of productive aspects, increasing well-being, livelihood, economy, national economy, production, and things like that. But yeah, with that, because of that nature and the need to reduce poverty, the need to increase food insecurity in this sub-Saharan Africa, that's why you see that when we come to restoration, now the mindset and the perception of pristine intrinsic tradition disappears. That's the reason. And this side, in the 5 cases Moses highlighted, you observe that I would think economy and production would not be a first choice in the 5 cases. Perhaps Moses can add on that for the different views. Moses, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Vianny. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. You want me to add something on that? Yes, when you're so presenting, I was just laughing at the different views and how things are really interconnected, plus even for Åsa. So I realized that what people prioritized in Ethiopia, you conducted that in Ethiopia, and the tropical landscapes was totally different from the perspectives here, but it's understandable. For me, this is what the narrative I would wish to be fronted at. We should try to move away from the productive part, the direct or benefits that are associated with that. 2 narratives should be built that while people are achieving the economic values directly, which is associated with the forests, they should also be able to think that it can also be preserved as places that are important for habitat and other things, for instance, sequestration. And I think in that format, that as we evolve or as we develop with time, the tropical areas are not left lagging behind looking at forests, because that view of forests as source of livelihood, as source of direct benefits, increases the problems we are seeing, deforestation or other things, because someone looks at it as something that I need to derive something. So that's the thinking. But I realized that actually the studies and the presentations were interconnected, and the consistencies in most of the slides. For instance, mine and Åsa, we realized the restoration programs dwelt mainly on biodiversity aspects. And in one of my suggestions, based on the finding, and also as Åsa put, we need to highlight the other benefits, the intangible benefits associated with restoration. And that's what restoration programs should target, especially in European landscapes. Yeah, and in the tropical landscapes, Vianny, you still need to do a lot. Of course, I'll also come and do a lot to change the mindset. Thank you.
I think, Alfred, you also had a question to Åsa.
Yes, and if I
Yes.
if I remember it right, it was sort of when do the public in what phase do the public get engaged?
Exactly.
So for the restoration actions that my authority is doing within the strictly like nature reserves, that is something that's in the management plan of the reserve, and that plan is communicated, and people are it's possible to give input to that when the nature reserve is funded, which might be several years in advance, which is so it's for the actions that is done within the strictly reserved nature reserves. We don't communicate anything in. We might communicate in beforehand, but that's more like this is going to happen. For example, reindeer herding communities, those we communicate, and they have the possibilities to say no, we don't want this. But for the public, they don't have anything to say, actually. Not on in the large scale, but of course on details. But that was for the strictly preserved nature. When it comes to other forested areas, for example, there is one example from here, the city of Umeå, where there is a forest in the middle of the city, which is a quite old natural forest, but there is very much recreational. There's a ski track and running tracks, and people are going there picking berries and mushrooms and etc. etc. And when the municipality planned to remake the management plan for that area, they had a lot of this kind of meetings in beforehand. They were calling people that they knew might have different opinions on how this area should be used. So in that kind of area, you do a lot of hearing from the public in beforehand. And also, for example, I was involved in when a large mining company were planning for, they're doing a plan for how their whole area will be restored after they leave the area. And then they were having quite many dialogue meetings with different stakeholder groups on how they would like to use this area. And also, yes, so they were really anchoring this in the society quite much. So yeah, I hope that answers a bit. It depends on what the state of the forest is, I would say.
Hello, thanks really for the 3 inspiring talks, and I have also one question, two questions. The first one is, I have to admit I'm a natural scientist, so if and I get the information directly from trees. So, but if you think about humans, I guess there's also a kind of a cultural background, which is important if you think about the perception of persons. So, and I've worked also for a while in Sweden, so I know that people are very, very polite and in a certain way also reluctant to, or perhaps to communicate negative information or perception, and it might be also perhaps different in other parts of the world. So one question for me, and I'm curious if you compare more the results from, say, Africa, Europe, and among different European states, do you think there might be also something like a cultural or ethical background which might more or less brings a bias in this idea of getting the information of perceptions? And the other point is also a bit related to the outcomes of Vianny. I have the impression that if you go more or less more on the side of the practitioners, the landowners, you often have a more resource-oriented and perception. But if you get more to the broader public and facilitators and so on, they have more this infrastructure or ecological service idea of restoration or restored forest or forest landscape. So that would be also my question. You can follow this idea, or can you see it also from your results, or do you would like to contradict?
Thanks, Andreas. What you said is true. We observe, I'll start from the case of Ethiopia before I come to the comparing the mindset and the perception between Europe and Africa. Within Ethiopia, between the facilitators, as you said, and the implementers, as you said, like the implementers, they're looking at to benefit from these sites. They have different point of view and find that they also know about biodiversity, they know carbon sequestration, they know climate change or microclimate shades and all this. They know these things. And but in terms of prioritization, they look towards the other side of provision. Of course, we can look at this within the GDP and aspects like that. But for the facilitators, the thing is, when we read the reports from the organizations, from the state administration, and also from the funders, carbon sequestration and biodiversity is highlighted more. But when you go to the ground, they come with this perception of increasing biodiversity, increasing carbon sequestration. But when you start implementation in landscapes with implementers with a mindset which is not ready to absorb the biodiversity aspects, then there's a lot of grudging, there's a lot of conflicts there in there. That's why in the conclusion, I said that towards the implementation, the two categories, the two actor groups, plus farmers and others, they have to come to the common table to discuss and negotiate. And this set priorities. Of course, they have priorities from the reports or from the proposal writing to the funders, and priorities from the funders, but also their priorities for the actual implementers on the ground. And these two categories have to come together to see what is the mismatch, what is the trade-off. If we push biodiversity, what will be missing, and how can we incentivize, which incentives are needed to bring all this close to an ecospace? That will be the other aspect. In terms of perception between Europe and Ethiopia, I can bring this from the fear of rational in economics, we have a different understanding, and the natural science have a different understanding. But I would say, fine, in Europe, they are more into this biodiversity, into the aspect. For example, Åsa mentioned about the pecking, the bird peckers or the woodpeckers, and also creating zones for wild animals and all that, which is good. Now, that perception in the tropics, they look at these animals as a disservice to their crops. Now, this is another thing, that if you come into communication with the implementers and say, okay, we're going to protect this for this animal, for these issues of biodiversity, they'll say, no, we don't want. When we do this and the forest recovers, then we lose our crops. I've seen this in Philly landscapes in Ethiopia, whereby farmers say, no, we don't want. So also the communication skill is different. And I like the recommendation from Åsa, where she said, start with the good benefits from these activities before you say we want to do biodiversity. So the facilitator have this mindset, which is really connected and related to the mindset of the European aspect or perception. If I'm sure if we do Moses's data and my data, only the facilitators, there will be a similarity between the two. You understand? But now the question is, how do you bring this perception and mindset to the implementers? This is where the challenge is, and this is where the beginning of conflicts and all that. Yeah, perhaps Moses wants to add something, or also from the European perspective.
I can just mention something, if I got Andrea as well, about the biases in social sciences. When you're doing these interviews or working with the people in specific topics. Yes, there are biases when dealing with people. But what we do is to try to minimize these biases through the strategy, right from the question and design. It has to go through lots of processes just to ensure personal biases are removed and also to ensure objectivity of the question. Then we mainly implement a method also that seek at least to randomly select people just to avoid the random or systematic selection bias, and also to avoid the coverage bias. That's to avoid the coverage bias. Also, you have to ensure that within the specific coverage, either you stratify to ensure that all the elements within a specific geographical location or location is covered. But also the statistical tools that we use have a way how it can highlight some causes of this bias in relation to other studies that have been published. So in that, you can isolate either those ones aside, just as you saw in my results. The German case really gives not something that we can talk, because the sample was small relative to other areas that I studied. But I decided to put it there, but not dwell on it, just to highlight that we also did here. Yes, but biases in social science is part of the research. Thank you.
It's always so interesting when natural scientists and social scientists come together and exchange. Just as a side note, Arthur, do you also want to respond or make a comment?
No, I leave it. I leave it to that.
Okay, I actually also wanted to ask a question related to the outcomes for the kind of general observation that biodiversity conservation doesn't seem to have a high value when it comes to public perceptions. But you already kind of responded to that, Vianny, from your point of view that you said that the different kind of expectations and needs from the different people involved, both the donors and the people who should benefit from it, needs to be kind of met in the middle in a way. But I think also a problem is the general problem, and that also applies to Europe actually, that it is very difficult yet for farmers and forest owners to monetize biodiversity conservation, which leads to the kind of question of payment for ecosystem services, which is of course a broader question, but I suppose this is also one of the reasons why the biodiversity conservation doesn't have a very high value, although we are not just facing a climate crisis, but also a crisis of biodiversity loss. And I think it's also a question of communication, that increased biodiversity actually also is beneficial for the resilience of the landscape. And that's maybe something in the long run that we as communicators or people involved in those projects need to also communicate more convincingly to the local communities or engage them on that topic, that it is actually in the long run beneficial for their landscapes, especially also when it comes to adaptation to climate change. So just as a small comment, we try to actually promote Scovia as a panelist, but also I think there it didn't work. We will have the final question from Scovia Akello now, before we wrap up the webinar. And it's a question to Vianny again. If you could share some of your experiences in keeping the communities motivated to be part of the project activities.
Yeah, thanks, Scovia, for the question. The thing is, we have to know, for example, I'll speak from the facilitation point of view, and also speak from the community point of view. As facilitators, they need to know that communities all sorts have daily work they do. For example, they have to do farming, those who have jobs have to go for jobs and things like that. Now, the question is, how do you make sure that a busy farmer is engaged into the project activities? Now, this is what is missed normally by the people implementing this project, that if you don't ask yourself that question, because when the farmer comes to join the project and start implementing, he's going to lose in terms of time. Of course, time and labor is the most important assets for the farmers. And also, this has to be covered up. Now, for those farmers who are really interested into restoration activities, are those farmers who have seen positive results from the neighbors, from the neighbor sites, and also from neighbor villages. So this would be also another issue of sharing experiences. Try to show farmers where it has worked and why it worked. That would be one aspect. The other aspect would be also to involve them and make the aims clear. And always farmers, if I'm going to lose my labor, now I'm talking from the farmer's perspective, if I'm going to lose my time, what's my benefit? Because if I lose time, I'm losing what I would have benefited from applying this labor in another activity. So this has to be compensated for. And I've seen this vision project in one of the sites whereby farmers, the objectives were clear to stop soil erosion and all that. And when this objective was clear and farmers had seen what soil erosion does to their crops when they start cultivating, then they realized, oh, we need to exclose this area. We need to do restoration in this area to conserve soil, to avoid damages on our crops. And this worked after, let's say, 15, 12, 20 years. It worked and the area has been restored. Now, there's another problem now if the area has been restored. Because farmers have been with you in restoration of the site, now the area has been restored. Now, from the perspective of the farmer, is that, oh, I've been putting in my labor and the trees have grown. What next now? I need to harvest something. Now, this is where the problem comes, that when they want now to harvest, to get the benefits from the labor and the time, this motivation which has been there, then the facilitator comes and says, oh no, we need to conserve carbon biodiversity, we need to keep it longer. And the farmer asked, for how long? can I really survive or put in labor again? Because also the incentives only come in the first year of the project. And now this is another issue that if the incentives comes, then the project have to plan incentives on a given time scale.
You're muted, Vianny. I don't know what happened.
Yeah, somebody muted me, but anyway, I was...
It was not the intention to make you shut up, but we also need to wrap it up soon.
Yes, I will summarize. To keep communities motivated, one, you have to make the goals clear, the aims clear, and these aims have to rhyme with the community's aims. This is one. And the other issue, you have to keep transparency of the aims and the goals. If you promise the communities, or if you work with the communities on 2, 3, 4 aims or bundles of services, show significant increase or show positive. If there's no positive and there's negative, try to work in order. Tell the community, be transparent, and tell the communities, no, this did not work. Let's repeat, let's try this and that. Work together with the communities. And when the benefits come, please allow the communities to get a share, because they are the general custodian of these restoration sites. If they do not get the benefits when they come, they will ban all sites and they will never be motivated to restore or engage into restoration projects. And lastly, what keeps to keep them motivated? Always train them on these silvicultural practices, give them knowledge. Training is the most important aspect now for the communities, because they could also apply the knowledge to their own lands than large-scale landscapes. Thank you.
Thank you, Vianny. That was better closing words than I could ever find, actually. I still need to say something on behalf of Marcel, because he asked me to, and then I would kindly ask Gabi also to share the slides for the next webinar. First of all, I want to thank you all. We've learned a lot for Superb, and I will try to get the quote from your last words, Vianny, and integrate that in some of our communication outputs, because I think you said all the crucial things when it comes to engaging local communities, which is crucial because they are the ones who need to maintain the restoration in the long run and support it, so they need to benefit from it. On behalf of Marcel, I should say that it's very important to bear in mind that in Superb, we have collected the potential views of the public around the demos, the selected demos, and the next phase will be to learn about the quantitative distribution of these views. So we will have large-scale surveys, and we will have, I think, another presentation on that at a later webinar. And then only then we will, of course, know whether Germany is actually different, and which of the parts which of the parts of the publics in the different demo areas are more biodiversity, recreation, or production oriented. I would like to announce now the next webinar also on behalf of Andreas, who had some issues with the servers at Thünen, and something unfortunately doesn't work today. However, he says goodbye also from his side, and thank you to all of you. And the next session will happen on the 11th of October, and we will talk about potential certification of forest restoration, and we will have a speaker from the Society for Ecological Restoration, and who will introduce us to their principles and the project that they are doing in the Mediterranean area now. And we will have Michael Kleine, who's the Deputy Executive Director and Coordinator on the Special Program for Development of Capacities at IUFRO. And just to tell you a little bit about the format of the Forest Restoration Talks, we aim at having these type of events like today, where we have more presentation and also exchange between the presenters to make it more interactive and more inspiring, and to bring in like different perspectives every time when we have those webinars. So thank you also to the participants, and I wish you a nice rest of the day or evening. I can imagine in Sweden it's already dark, in other countries it's still quite light and we can enjoy some sunlight still. And I'm looking forward to having a great webinar again on the 11th of October. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gesh.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.